Jaehaerys returned to King's Landing after many moons, a much more sorrowful king. The most devout had chosen the high septon he had sought. The doctrine of exemptionalism was now set to become a tenet of the faith. An accord had been forged with the powerful House Hightower, yet the death of his mother, Dowager Queen Alysanne, had robbed those triumphs of any satisfaction. Jaehaerys was not a man inclined to dwell upon his grief. As he would do many times throughout his reign, the king set aside his sorrow and devoted himself once more to the governance of his realm. Summer had yielded to autumn, and the leaves were falling throughout the Seven Kingdoms. In the Red Mountains, a new Vulture King had arisen, whilst the sweating sickness had taken hold upon the Three Sisters. Across the Narrow Sea, Tyrosh and Lys drifted ever closer to war, a conflict that seemed all but certain to spread to the Stepstones and disrupt the flow of trade. Each of these matters demanded the king's attention, and Jaehaerys saw to them all. Queen Alysanne sought comfort elsewhere. In the wake of losing her mother, she found new joy in her daughter. Though Princess Daenerys was not yet a year and a half old, she had been talking, after a fashion, since well before her first name day, and had already progressed from crawling to unsteady steps, and then to running. "She's in a great hurry, this one," her wet nurse told the queen. The young princess was a cheerful child, boundless, curious, and utterly without fear, beloved by all who knew her. So captivated was Alysanne that for a time she even began to forego council meetings, choosing instead to spend her days at Daenerys' side, playing with her and reading the same stories that her own mother had once read to her. "She is so clever, she'll be reading to me before long," she told the king. "She's going to be a great queen, I know it." In that cruel year of 54 AC, the stranger had not yet finished with House Targaryen. Upon her return to Dragonstone, across Blackwater Bay, Rhaena Targaryen found fresh sorrow awaiting her. Where young Daenerys had become a source of comfort and happiness for Queen Alysanne, Rhaena's own daughter, Aerea, had become a constant trial. A headstrong and unruly child, she defied her scepters, her mother, and her maesters alike, mistreated her servants, slipped away from prayers, lessons, and meals without permission, and addressed the men and women of her mother's court with such memorable names as Sir Stupid and Lord Pigface. Rhaena's husband, Androw Farman, though never as outspoken nor as openly defiant, harboured no less resentment. When the first word reached Dragonstone, Dowager Queen Alysanne was nearing the end. Andro declared he would accompany his wife to Storm's End. As her husband, he insisted, his place was beside Rhaena, offering what comfort he could. The queen rejected the proposal, and did so in no gentle fashion. Their quarrel was loud enough to be heard before her departure, and those nearby later recalled Rhaena saying, "The wrong Farman had run away." By 54 AC, theirs was a marriage that had never known passion, and had instead descended into little more than a mummer's farce, and not an entertaining one, Lady Elaine Royce was once to have said. Androw Farman was no longer the youth that Rhaena had wed on Fair Isle 5 years prior. When he had been 17, handsome, young, his face had become swollen, his shoulders had begun to stoop. Never a man held in especially high regard by his peers, he spent Rhaena's years of wandering through the West, overlooked by the noble lords who played host to them. Life on Dragonstone brought little improvement. Though his wife remained a queen, no one regarded Andro as a king, nor yet even a consort. He occupied a place by Rhaena's side at tables, but not in her bed. That privilege belonged instead to her companions and favourites, whilst his own chambers stood in another tower entirely. Court gossips claimed the queen had told him they were better sleeping apart, so they had no need to disturb each other should they find pretty bedmaids to warm their beds. The histories, however, gave no reason to believe Andro ever did. "I fed my last husband to a dragon. If you make me take another, I may eat him myself." Rhaena Targaryen to her sister Alysanne Targaryen on Androw Farman. Fire and Blood, Jaehaerys and Alysanne, their triumphs and tragedies. Androw's days were no fuller than his nights. Though born upon one island and now dwelling upon another, he showed little interest in sailing, swimming, or fishing. Having failed as a squire, he possessed no talent with a sword, axe, or spear, and whilst the castle garrison drilled each morning in the yard, he remained abed. Believing him perhaps to be a man inclined towards books, Maester Culloper sought to acquaint him with the rich histories of Dragonstone's library, from its weighty volumes to its ancient Valyrian scrolls, the very works that had so captivated King Jaehaerys. He soon discovered, however, that Andro could not read. Though Andro was a capable rider, and would occasionally have a horse saddled to amble around the castle yard, he never ventured beyond the gates to explore the stony paths of the Dragonmount, the distant reaches of the island, or even the fishing village and docks that lay beneath the castle. He drinks a deal, Maester Culloper wrote to the Citadel, and he's been known to spend entire days in the chamber of the painted table, moving little wooden soldiers about on the map. Queen Rhaena's companions are wont to say he's planning his conquest of Westeros. They do not mock him to his face for her sake, but they titter at him behind her back. The knights and men-at-arms pay him no mind whatsoever, and the servants obey him, or not, as they please, with no fear of his displeasure. The children are the cruelest, as children often are, and none half so cruel as the Princess Aerea. She once emptied a chamber pot upon his head, not for anything he did, but because she was wroth with her mother. Life on Dragonstone became even more miserable for Androw Farman as his sister departed. Lady Alyssa had been the person closest to him, perhaps the only true friend he possessed, as Maester Culloper observed, and despite Androw's tearful protest, Queen Rhaena found it difficult to believe he played no part in the theft of her dragon eggs. After Sir Merrill Bullock was dismissed, Andro asked his wife to name him commander of the castle garrison in his stead. At the time, her grace was breaking her fast with 4 of her ladies in waiting. His request was met with laughter from the women, and, after a brief pause, from the Queen herself. Later, when Rhaena prepared to fly to King's Landing to inform Jaehaerys of the theft of the dragon eggs, Andro offered to accompany her. His wife rejected the offer with scorn. What would that serve? What could you possibly do but fall off the dragon? Rhaena's refusal to allow Andro to accompany her to Storm's End proved to be only the latest, and ultimately the final in a long succession of humiliations he'd endured. By the time the Queen returned from her mother's deathbed, any wish he might once have had to offer her comfort had long since faded. Withdrawn and bitter, he spoke little during meals, and otherwise kept out of Rhaena's company whenever he could. If his coldness caused Queen Rhaena any distress, she showed no evidence of it. Instead, she sought comfort amongst her ladies, surrounding herself with old companions such as Samantha Stokeworth and Elaine Royce, together with her new favourites, including her young cousin Lyanna Velaryon, Cassella, the fair daughter of Lord Staunton, and the young sceptre Miriam. Whatever comfort her companions brought proved all too fleeting. Autumn had settled over Dragonstone, as it had across the rest of Westeros, bringing cold northern winds and fierce storms, sweeping up the narrow sea from the south. A deeper gloom descended on the ancient fortress, a place dark enough even in the height of summer, and it seemed that even the dragons felt the chill and the damp. As the year drew to its end, sickness came to Dragonstone. It was neither the sweating sickness, nor the shaking sickness, nor grayscale, Maester Culloper pronounced. The illness first declared itself with bloody stool, soon followed by agonizing cramps in the belly. The Maester told Queen Rhaena that any number of diseases might be responsible, but which of them had struck Dragonstone he never had the chance to determine. Less than 2 days after falling ill himself, Culloper was dead. His successor, Maester Anselm, believed the old man's years had counted against him. Culloper was nearer 1980 and no longer a man of strength. Cassella Staunton was the first to fall to the sickness, though only 14. Sceptre Miriam soon followed, as did Elaine Royce, and even the loud, larger-than-life Samantha Stokeworth, who had often boasted that she'd never known a day's illness in her life. All 3 perished on the same night, only hours apart. The sickness, however, never touched Rhaena herself, even as those counted amongst her closest friends and companions were claimed, one after the other. Maester Anselm believed it was the blood of old Valyria that preserved her. Illness that carried off ordinary men and women with a matter of hours, he suggested, could not so easily overcome the blood of the dragon. Men, too, appeared largely untouched by this strange affliction, save for Maester Culloper. Every victim was a woman. The men of Dragonstone, whether knights, scullions, stable boys or singers, remained in good health. Queen Rhaena commanded the gates of Dragonstone be shut and barred. Beyond the castle wall the sickness had not yet spread, and she was determined that it should remain so for the sake of her small folk. Word was sent to King's Landing, where Jaehaerys wasted no time in responding. He ordered Lord Velaryon to dispatch his galleys to ensure that no one escaped the island, carrying this pestilence with them. The king's hand obeyed without hesitation, though the command brought him little comfort, for amongst those still trapped upon Dragonstone was his own young niece. Lyanna Velaryon breathed her last, even as her uncle's galleys were casting off from Driftmark. Maester Anselm had tried every remedy he could devise, purging her, bleeding her, and laying her beneath ice, yet none of it availed. She died convulsing in the arms of Queen Rhaena, whilst the Queen held her close and wept without restraint. The sight of his wife's tears stirred something in Androw Farman. "You weep for her," Andro said, when he saw the tears on his wife's face. "But you would not weep for me." His words ignited the Queen's rage. Rhaena struck him sharply across the face, then ordered him from her presence, declaring she wished to be alone. "You shall be," Andro said. She was the last of them. Even then, the Queen was so overwhelmed by grief she failed to perceive what had truly transpired. It was Rego Draz, the king's Pentoshi Master of Coin, who first voiced his suspicion when Jaehaerys gathered his small council to consider the deaths upon Dragonstone. As he read through Maester Alysanne's accounts, Lord Rego drew his brow together before saying, "Sickness? This is no sickness. A weasel in the guts, dead in a day. This is the Tears of Lys. Poison." "Poison," King Jaehaerys said in shock. "We know more of such things in the Free Cities," Draz assured him. "It's the tears. Never doubt it. The old maester would have seen it too long enough, so he had to be the first to die." "That's how I would do it, not that I would. Poison is dishonourable." "Only women were struck down," objected Lord Velaryon. "Only women got the poison then," said Rego Draz. When Septon Bath and Grand Maester Benefit agreed with Lord Rego's conclusion, the king immediately sent a raven to Dragonstone. The moment Rhaena Targaryen read the contents, every doubt was swept away. Calling for the captains of her guard, she ordered that her husband be found and brought before her. Androw Farman was nowhere to be found, not in his own bedchamber, nor the Queen's, not in the Great Hall, nor the stables, nor the Sept, nor even Aegon's garden. At last, in the Sea Dragon Tower within the Maester's chambers, beneath the rookery, they found Maester Anselm dead, a dagger buried between his shoulder blades. With the gates shut and barred, there was no means of leaving the castle save by dragon. "My worm of a husband does not have the courage for that," Rhaena declared. Androw Farman was discovered in the chamber of the painted table, a long sword gripped tightly in his hand. He offered no denial of the poisonings. Instead, he gloried in them. "I brought them cups of wine and they drank. They thanked me and they drank. Why not? A cupbearer, a serving man. That's how they saw me. Andro the sweet, Andro the jape. What could I do but fall off a dragon? I could have done a lot of things. I could have been a lord. I could have made laws. I could have been wise and given you counsel. I could have killed your enemies as easily as I killed your friends. I could have given you children." Rhaena Targaryen did not so much as answer him. Instead, she turned to her guards. "Take him and geld him, but staunch the wound. I want his cock and balls fried up and fed to him. Do not let him die until he's eaten every bite." "No," Androw Farman shouted as they moved around the painted table to grasp him. "My wife can fly, so can I." With those words, he made a wild slash at the nearest guardsman, retreated towards the window behind him, and hurled himself through it. His flight lasted only an instant, ending far below with death. Afterwards, Rhaena ordered that his corpse be cut into pieces and fed to the dragons. He was the last noble death of 54 AC, yet the misfortune of the Year of the Stranger was not at its end. As a stone cast into a pond sends ripples spreading ever outward, so too did the evil wrought by Androw Farman continue to spread across the realm, reaching into the lives of others and warping them long after the dragons had finished feasting upon his blackened and smoking remains.